It's been over 2 decades in the making, but the future of a trade deal between the European Union and South America's Mercosur trading bloc is now in serious doubt. So, with the help of a couple of experts, let's take a look at what the agreement actually is and why it's raising temperatures either side of the Atlantic. The deal would see a free trade area created incorporating the 27 EU countries and Mercosur's 4 members Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay. It would be the biggest free trade area in the world, covering 780 million people and accounting for 20% of global trade. And the two sides have spent 24 years negotiating it so far. So let's understand exactly what the Mercosur EU deal would mean for economies either side of the Atlantic. Gerards Iglesias is a Latin America analyst at the Cologne Institute for Economic Research. Thank you very much for joining us. So just explain to us what this deal was supposed to achieve in the first place when they set out to negotiate this a quarter of a century ago.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the invitation. Right now, there are tariffs on 85% of the traded goods on both sides. And with the agreement, more than 90% of those tariffs would be abolished. This would mean a lot of savings on traded goods. So the German Chamber of Commerce estimates on 4 billion euros per year. And it would also create one of the biggest consumer markets and trade areas worldwide, with 715 million of consumers, which would be a lot for both regions, also to expand their exports and to create new opportunities for growth.
We should talk about how it'll affect specific sectors. But first, let's just look at existing trade between the two trading blocs, because in 2022, it totaled almost $730 billion. Key exports from the EU to the Mercosur countries included plastic products like bottles, also cars and machinery, and chemicals, things like fertilizer. And then central to trade in the other direction are soybeans, meats, oil, etc. So, Simon, how do businesses stand to benefit from the trade area, firstly in the EU?
Well, I think for the EU, it would be an opportunity to import cheaper meat and cheaper soybeans, but this is also kind of a critique, for example, the French president has on this deal, why it is under critique because of the import opportunities of agricultural goods. But in fact, there are very few quotas, or there are quotas which set the imports on very low scale for South America. So actually only 1.2% of the European meat production, of the European beef meat and poultry meat production would be affected by the deal. So in the end, we are talking about very few amounts of imported agricultural goods from South America. But on the other side, the export opportunities are much bigger for European companies, especially on the automotive sector and in machineries and chemicals and pharmaceutical goods. And in the end, on both sides of the Atlantic, consumers would benefit from cheaper products, and which would also eventually tame inflation, which is something that both continents suffer. Furthermore, it is more of a political signal that why the agreement is so important. The European Commission and the German government, they pursue a strategy of diversification and de-risking, and a ratification of this agreement would also be a proof that de-risking, diversification is more than only words, that Europe is still capable of acting in trade policy, and this is, I think, the most important thing for us here.
Gerards Iglesias, it's been really interesting getting your take on this, so thank you very much. That's Gerards Iglesias from the Cologne Institute for Economic Research. Thank you. So is the Mercosur EU deal ever actually going to happen? Well, let's speak to Bruno Binetti from the Department of International Relations at the London School of Economics. Thanks a lot for being with us. So why does it seem like the two sides can't quite get this one over the line?
Well, I would say there are differences between Mercosur and the EU, but perhaps most importantly, there are differences within each bloc. And I think these differences have been persistent in the 20 years this agreement has been negotiated. And now everything's coming to the fold. And I think we are realizing that there's no consensus for this agreement to go through.
The big hold-up from the EU side, despite Germany being very much in favour of this, is France. And France has been against this pretty much from the start. Can you just explain to us why France and Emmanuel Macron are so against this deal?
Absolutely. In the EU, you have voices that are in favor of this agreement, including the Commission, including Germany, which is an industrial exporting country, including Spain, that has historical ties, economic and cultural, with Latin America. But the big holdout is France, and that's mostly because of agricultural interests in France and how politically influential they are. And President Macron has expressed many times that he's not willing to open EU markets for Mercosur agricultural products that are much cheaper than French producers can provide. And he has built a sort of alliance with environmental interests within the EU that are concerned about the impact of this agreement for deforestation, particularly around the Amazon. So Mercosur countries are accusing Macron of a sort of green protectionism by hiding his country's agricultural interests behind an environmental rhetoric.
Right, because they have made quite specific requests, haven't they, the French, on behalf of, to get this deal over the line to the Mercosur powers. They include protecting the Amazon. They are all environmental things. So is ultimately this deal that, negotiations began 2.5 decades ago, but it's actually falling down on quite a modern issue?
Well, I would say there are other interests at stake. On the Mercosur side, you have some industries, particularly in Argentina, that are concerned about an influx of European manufacturers that might weaken them even further. On the Brazilian side, I think there's a little bit more consensus about the importance of this agreement. But it's true, this is a problem that has been at the core of this agreement. Let's remember that the EU has found it very hard to sign a free trade agreement with Canada, for instance, because of resistance from agricultural sectors. And in this case, Mercosur is a much bigger, it would be the largest free trade agreement ever for the European Union. And it seems that these differences that are at the core, and have been at the core of these negotiations for years, are not going away.
Germany is nevertheless pushing very hard for this to go through. It's given the deal its full backing. It was actually the main topic of discussion when Olaf Scholz met with Brazil's President Lula earlier this week. We've got a clip here of what the German Chancellor had to say after that meeting.
Es lohnt sich.
It is worth it, because together we will form one of the largest free trade areas in the world. This will send out a clearer signal for open markets, fair standards, good jobs, and rules-based trade. This signal can hardly be underestimated, especially in times of increasing protectionism worldwide.
So, Bruno Binetti, we've got a kind of power struggle here, haven't we, between the two biggest economies in the EU, France and Germany. Does Germany have the clout to persuade France to change its mind on this?
I don't think so. I think French agricultural protectionism is a historical trend. It is at the core of the EU itself. The common agricultural policy was virtually designed to address concerns by the French agricultural sector. And I think the words from the Chancellor suggest that this, for Germany and for the EU institutions, this is more than about trade, right? This is about the identity of the European Union. This is about whether the European Union has a future as an actor beyond its immediate area of influence, which is why I think the Commission is so interested in this. In times of geopolitical struggle, the war in Ukraine, etc., approving this deal would signal that the EU is a player on par with the US and China on the global stage. It doesn't seem that it will go that way.
Across the Atlantic, one of the major points that has emerged very recently is the election of a new government that's about to take power at this weekend, in fact, in Argentina. A new government that seems keen on this deal, but the current government, the outgoing government, is against it. So does that mean that it is going to happen from the Argentinians' perspective or not?
I think it's very clear that the new president that's taking office in 5 days is in favor of this agreement. So if the only problem was Argentina, then it would be resolved in a week. So it's clear that despite the pro-free trade position of the new Argentine president, Javier Milei, Argentina is not the key factor here. I think we have to see at the European side of this to understand why this deal has not taken place yet.
We've heard from some analysts that this deal could die next year, in 2024. That could be the end of it. We won't be talking about it this time next year. I mean, just to conclude, what's your view on that?
Well, for the last 20 years, even when negotiations were stuck, there were always statements from both sides saying that they wanted this agreement to happen. So I don't expect it to die fully, but it will probably remain a zombie, just as it has been for the last 20 years.
The undead deal. All right, Bruno Binetti from the London School of Economics. Thank you very much for joining and giving us your insights.
Thank you.
And that's all from this DW Business look at the future, or potential lack of it, as you've been hearing, of the Mercosur-EU trade deal. There's plenty more from us here on the DW News YouTube channel, so we'll see you over at the next one.